For 26 years I was the dust under my family's custom Persian rugs. Invisible, easily swept away. But nothing commands attention quite like the deafening roar of a V12 engine pulling into the driveway of the people who swore you'd amount to nothing. Welcome to my family reunion. To understand the absolute silence of my childhood, you have to understand the deafening volume of my siblings. I was born into the Hastings family household where love wasn't freely given. It was a highly volatile currency traded only for bragging rights. My mother Brenda was a woman whose entire existence revolved around the country club hierarchy and keeping up appearances. My father Richard was a mid-level corporate executive who worshipped money and the people who had more of it than he did. Then there were their masterpieces, Savannah and Chase. Savannah, my older sister by 3 years, was the golden child. A former regional beauty queen with perfectly symmetrical features and a personality entirely composed of backhanded compliments. Chase, my younger brother by 2 years, was the miracle boy, the highly anticipated son who could do no wrong even when he was actively doing wrong. And right in the middle was me, Chloe, the oops baby, the placeholder. I learned very early on that my role in the Hastings family was to be unseen and unheard, stepping in only to make life easier for the other 4. When I was 10, I spent an entire weekend hand-making a birthday card for my father, meticulously painting his favorite golf course. He opened it, gave a dismissive nod, and set it down on the kitchen counter. Later that evening, I found it in the trash, buried under the wrapping paper from the $300 loan Savannah had bought him using his own credit card. The blatant favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was entirely structural. Everything in our house was geared toward elevating my siblings. When Savannah turned 16, there was a massive party catered by a local restaurant, culminating in a giant red bow being placed on the hood of a brand new BMW 3 Series. When Chase turned 16, he was handed the keys to a custom Jeep Wrangler, despite having a GPA that was barely clinging to life. When I turned 18, the age where most kids get a celebratory send-off into adulthood, my parents were strangely quiet. I came downstairs that morning expecting, at the very least, a pancake breakfast. Instead, my mother was barking orders at the maid to steam Savannah's dress for a college sorority formal. My father was reading the paper. "Happy birthday to me," I muttered, pouring myself a bowl of dry cereal. My father barely looked up. "Right. Happy birthday, Chloe. There's an envelope on the counter. Don't spend it all in one place." Inside was a $50 gift card to a generic chain bookstore. That evening, my parents took Savannah and Chase out to a high-end steakhouse to celebrate Chase making the varsity lacrosse team. I was left behind to watch the house because, as my mother put it, someone needs to be here to let the plumber in tomorrow morning, and you never have weekend plans anyway. Knelt. Ellie. Wow. So. The real breaking point, however, came when it was time for college. I had worked tirelessly, keeping my head down and my grades immaculate. I was accepted into a fantastic out-of-state university with a solid business program. I had earned a partial scholarship, but I still needed my parents to co-sign a student loan to cover the rest of the tuition and my dorm. I presented the paperwork to my father in his study. He put on his reading glasses, skimmed the document, and sighed heavily, pushing it back across the desk. "Chloe, we just can't take on this kind of financial liability right now," he said, using his best corporate rejection voice. "The economy is tight. We're funneling a lot of resources into Chase's private sports academy, and Savannah's wedding to Bradley is going to cost a fortune. You'll have to go to the local community college and work your way through." I stared at him, my vision blurring with hot, furious tears. "You bought Chase a $40,000 car last year. Savannah is marrying a hedge fund manager. Bradley's family could pay for the wedding 10 times over. I'm asking for a signature on a loan I will pay back. The decision is final," he snapped, turning back to his laptop. "Don't be dramatic. Life isn't fair." He was right. Life wasn't fair. But I decided right then and there that I was done playing a rigged game. 3 days later, I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags. I didn't say goodbye. I left a note on the kitchen island that simply read, "I'll pay my own way. Don't call me." As I dragged my bags out the front door, Savannah walked past me, sipping an iced coffee. "Oh, are you moving into a dorm?" "Have fun being broke." She didn't offer to help me carry my bags. My mother didn't come out to hug me. My father didn't look up from his golf magazine. I walked to the bus station completely alone and stepped off the property in my childhood for what I swore would be the very last time. The next 6 years of my life were a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated survival. I didn't go to the community college. I moved 3 states away to a sprawling, rainy city where nobody knew my name, and I started from absolute scratch. I worked as a barista from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. I waited tables at a diner from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. In the dead hours of the night, sitting on the floor of a studio apartment so small I could touch the stove from my mattress, I taught myself how to code. I fueled my body on cheap ramen, instant coffee, and pure concentrated spite. Every time I wanted to quit, every time the exhaustion threatened to crack my spine, I thought of my father's dismissive sigh. I thought of my mother's cold eyes. I thought of Savannah's sneer. I channeled my trauma into ambition. By 22, I had developed a beta version of a highly complex software platform designed to streamline global supply chain logistics for massive e-commerce retailers. It wasn't a glamorous consumer app. It was heavy, boring, highly technical back-end stuff, but it was incredibly efficient, and more importantly, it solved the billion-dollar problem. I pitched it relentlessly. I was rejected 99 times, but the 100th pitch landed on the desk of Jamie Pendleton, a ruthless but brilliant venture capitalist. He saw the potential, saw my absolute hunger, and gave me my first round of seed funding. I didn't just build a company, I built an empire in the shadows. I hired aggressively, pivoted when necessary, and worked 100-hour weeks. At 24, my company hit a $10 million valuation. At 26, we secured a major contract with one of the largest logistics firms in North America. By the time I was 28, my company was acquired in a brutal, highly competitive buyout. I walked away with an 8-figure payout, completely liquid. I was 28 years old, and I had more money in my personal checking account than my parents and Savannah's pompous husband had combined. And throughout those entire 10 years, but my family never reached out. Not a text, not a call, not an email. To them, Chloe Hastings had simply ceased to exist until the invitation arrived. It was forwarded to me by an old high school acquaintance who occasionally checked in on me. A heavy, gold-embossed digital invitation for Brenda and Richard Hastings' grand 35th wedding anniversary gala, hosted at the ultra-exclusive Oak Bridge Country Club. The event was clearly designed to be a massive show of wealth, a vanity project to prove to their peers how perfect their family was. I wasn't invited, of course, but looking at that digital card, a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. It was time. I had healed, I had conquered, and now I wanted to put on a show. I decided to treat myself to a little graduation present for surviving my 20s. I didn't buy a house. I already had a gorgeous penthouse. Instead, I called a specialized exotic car broker. 2 weeks later, a covered transport truck dropped off my new daily driver, a custom Lamborghini Aventador SVJ. Matte black, aggressively low to the ground with custom blood-red leather interiors. It looked like a stealth fighter jet, and its naturally aspirated V12 engine sounded like the wrath of God. It cost nearly $500,000, paid in full via wire transfer. The day of the anniversary party, I spent the afternoon getting ready. I didn't overdo it. I wore a sleek, tailored Alexander McQueen suit in a deep charcoal, a pair of Christian Louboutin stilettos, and a vintage Cartier watch that cost more than my father's annual salary. No massive logos, true wealth whispers, but my car was about to scream. I arrived at the Oak Ridge Country Club right at the peak of cocktail hour. The sunset was painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink. The outdoor terrace was packed with the local elite, sipping champagne and laughing at terribly boring jokes. I could see my family holding court near the grand staircase. Savannah looked stressed, wearing an overly beaded gown. Chase was there, looking slightly bloated and wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right. Brenda and Richard were grinning, soaking up the attention. The winding driveway up to the club was lined with Mercedes, Lexuses, and the occasional Porsche. The valet stand was busy. I downshifted as I turned into the main gates. The Aventador's exhaust crackled and popped like a string of firecrackers. Heads immediately began to turn on the terrace. I crept up the long, sweeping driveway, the deep, guttural idle of the engine echoing off the manicured stone walls of the country club. The jazz quartet playing on the patio literally stopped playing. Every single eye at the party, including my family's, was glued to the matte black monster crawling toward the valet. I could see the men, including my father and Savannah's husband, Bradley, leaning over the balcony railing, their eyes wide with automotive lust. I pulled to a stop right at the red carpet. The valet, a young kid who looked absolutely terrified, jobbed up. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I reached down, pulled the latch, and the heavy scissor door swung upwards toward the sky. I swung my legs out, the red soles of my stilettos clicking against the pavement, and stepped out of the car. I handed the key fob to the trembling valet. "Keep it out front," I said smoothly, sliding a crisp $100 bill into his hand. "Don't scratch the rims." I turned and looked up at the terrace. The look on my family's faces was something I will cherish on my deathbed. It was a rapid, visible sequence of emotions. First, confusion. Who is this striking, wealthy woman? Then recognition. Wait, her face looks familiar. And finally, absolute paralyzing shock. It's Chloe. My mother's champagne flute literally slipped from her fingers, shattering against the stone floor. A sharp crash snapped the crowd out of their trance, but nobody looked away. My father's jaw was unhinged, his face turning a bizarre shade of gray. Savannah looked as though she had just been physically struck, her eyes darting frantically between me and the $500,000 supercar parked behind me. I walked slowly up the grand stone steps, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I didn't look angry. I didn't look nervous. I looked serene. I reached the top of the stairs, stopping exactly 3 feet away from my parents. The silence was so heavy you could suffocate on it. "Happy anniversary, Father," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying easily in the quiet air. "Chloe," my mother gasped, her voice shrill and trembling. She looked past me to the valet stand. "But whose car is that? Are you driving for an exotic rental service?" Savannah stepped forward, a nasty, desperate smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. "Yeah, Chloe. Careful, you scratch a rental like that, you'll be paying it off for the rest of your life." I let out a soft, amused laugh. I looked directly into my father's eyes. The man who had refused to co-sign a basic student loan. "It's not a rental, Savannah," I said, my voice dripping with cold, hard truth. "It's mine, title's in my name, paid in cash." The color completely drained from Bradley's face. He knew cars, he knew exactly what that vehicle cost, and he knew you didn't buy an Aventador SVJ with a decent credit score and a payment plan. You bought it with immense, undeniable wealth. My father suddenly cleared his throat, his corporate instincts kicking in. His posture changed. The dismissal of my youth vanished, replaced instantly by the sycophantic grin he reserved for the CEO of his company. "Chloe," my father boomed, stepping forward with his arms wide open, faking a warmth that made my stomach churn. "My God, look at you, our little girl, all grown up. We've missed you so much. Where have you been hiding?" He actually tried to hug me. I took a single, deliberate step backward. Don't, I said softly, but loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. A smile froze on his face. The karma had only just arrived at the venue, and I was about to serve it up course by agonizing course. The silence on the terrace of the Oakbridge Country Club was absolute. You could have heard a single pine needle drop onto the manicured lawn. My father, Richard, stood there with his arms awkwardly suspended in midair, his fake, sycophantic smile twitching at the corners. I hadn't moved an inch, but the boundary I had just drawn was as solid as a concrete wall. Don't, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, completely stripping away the pleasantry. Savannah, unable to process a reality where she wasn't the center of attention, finally snapped out of her shock. Her survival instinct was to attack. She stepped in front of our father, crossing her arms over her heavily beaded bodice. "Okay, seriously, what is this, Chloe?" She sneered, though her voice shook just enough to betray her panic. "You vanished for 6 years, miss my wedding, miss Chase's graduation, and now you show up in a mobster car trying to steal the spotlight on Mom and Dad's anniversary? What, did you find some geriatric sugar daddy to buy you a toy? Or are you running some kind of crypto scam?" A collective gasp rippled through the nearest guests. My mother, Brenda, pressed a hand to her pearls, looking around frantically to see who was listening. "Didn't get mad. I just smiled, a slow, pitying expression. Savannah, you're 31 years old, and you're still relying on Daddy's credit card to pay for your Pilates membership. The only person in this family who needs a sponsor is you." Her jaw dropped. Before she could shriek a response, her husband, Bradley, pushed his way forward. Bradley was a junior partner at Wellington Capital, a boutique hedge fund. He lived and breathed money, acquisitions, and corporate gossip. He had been staring at me, his brow furrowed in intense concentration, as if trying to place my face on a magazine cover he had seen in a waiting room. "Wait," Bradley said, his voice breathless. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Wait, Chloe Hastings. You're that Hastings? The founder of Omni Route Logistics?" That's so that, the, they... I shifted my gaze to him. I was the founder, yes. Before the acquisition. Bradley looked like he was going to pass out. He turned to my father, his eyes bulging. "Richard, are you kidding me? You told me your youngest daughter was working as a waitress in the Pacific Northwest." "You didn't tell me she was Chloe Hastings." He turned back to the crowd, almost manic. "Her company developed the back-end routing software that Sterling Freight uses. She sold it to a multinational conglomerate 8 months ago for..." "Bradley, that's enough," I cut in sharply. True wealth doesn't shout numbers at a country club mixer. But the damage was done. The word acquisition hung in the air like a localized weather event. The whispering among the country club elite erupted into an outright buzz. My mother looked as though she had been physically struck. Her brain, wired entirely for social climbing, was short-circuiting. The daughter she had treated like a live-in maid was standing in front of her as a self-made titan. Chase, who had been conspicuously silent, finally lumbered over. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, wearing a Rolex that I instantly recognized as a high-end replica. "So, you're rich," he mumbled, his voice carrying a pathetic, childlike hope. "Like really rich." "I'm comfortable, Chase," I said flatly. My father's corporate survival instincts finally overrode his shock. He grabbed my mother's elbow, forcing a booming, artificial laugh. "Well, what a fantastic surprise. Our brilliant daughter, coming home to celebrate with us. Chloe, sweetheart, let's step inside. Let's get a drink, catch up." Away from the crowd. He didn't wait for an answer. He gestured toward the heavy oak doors of the clubhouse library. It was a classic power play: isolate the target, control the environment. I decided to indulge him, mostly because I wanted to see exactly how deep his desperation ran. I followed him into the library, a stuffy room smelling of old paper and expensive scotch. The heavy doors ticked shut behind us, muting the noise of the party. Savannah, Bradley, and Chase had tried to follow, but my father had shot them a look that firmly anchored them outside. It was just me, Richard, and Brenda. The moment the door closed, my father's jovial mask melted away entirely. He looked his age-late 50s, but carrying the heavy, sagging weight of a man drowning in stress. He walked over to a leather wingback chair and gripped the back of it so hard his knuckles turned white. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother hissed, her voice trembling with misplaced indignation. 6 years, Chloe. We thought you were dead or in jail. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to tell people we didn't know where you were? You didn't care where I was, Mother, I replied, walking over to a mahogany side table and tracing the grain with my fingertip. You were embarrassed because my absence was a bad look for your country club persona. You never once called the police. You never hired an investigator. You just painted over me. We gave you everything, she cried, tears of pure frustration pooling in her eyes. We put a roof over your head. You put a roof over your staff's head too, Brenda, but you pay them, I shot back, dropping the title of mother. I earned my keep, but we aren't here to rehash my childhood. Why did you pull me in here, Richard? My father swallowed hard. He looked at my mother, giving her a subtle nod before looking back at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something pathetic and hollow. Chloe, he started, his voice cracking slightly. I made some investments. Aggressive ones. I had to keep up the lifestyle. Savannah's wedding cost nearly $250,000, and Bradley's family expected us to match their contributions. Chase had some business ventures that didn't pan out. Several of them. I leaned against the table, crossing my arms. Get to the point. He took a deep, shuddering breath. I leveraged the house. Twice. I borrowed against my retirement, and I took a massive loan from a private lender to cover a margin call last quarter. My position at Harrison Caldwell. They're restructuring. I'm being forced into early retirement at the end of the month, with a fraction of my pension. I stared at him, letting the math click together in my head. The $40,000 Jeep for Chase. The $300 cologne. The country club dues. It was all a house of cards built on toxic debt and agonizing vanity. We are completely underwater, Chloe, my mother whimpered, finally letting a tear spill over her perfectly powdered cheek. The bank has already sent the pre-foreclosure notices. If we don't come up with $2 million by the end of the quarter, they're taking the house. They're taking everything. My father took a step toward me, his hands clasped together in a sickening display of supplication. You just sold a company. You have liquid capital. Bradley knows it, which means everyone out there is about to know it. If you could just front us the $2 million. Consider it a loan, an investment in your family. I will pay you back with interest. I stood there in the quiet library, the ticking of a grandfather clock, the only sound in the room. I looked at the man who had sat in his plush study 6 years ago, flatly refusing to co-sign a $15,000 student loan that would have changed my life. I looked at the woman who had watched me drag my bags to a bus station without shedding a single tear. I reached into my tailored suit pocket and pulled out my phone. I checked the time. No, I said quietly. My father blinked, as if he hadn't heard the word before. What? Chloe, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, my voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't anger, it was pure glacial indifference. You took on massive financial liabilities to elevate Savannah and Chase, and it blew up in your face. You built a life on appearances, and now the bill is due. I am your father, he suddenly roared, slamming his fist against the leather chair. You owe me. I owe you absolutely nothing, I countered, stepping directly into his space, forcing him to look down at me. When I asked you for help for a simple signature on a student loan that I was going to pay myself, you sat in your office and told me that the decision was final. Do you remember what else you told me? He stared at me, his face pale, his breath catching in his throat. He remembered. "You told me not to be dramatic," I whispered, echoing his words from a lifetime ago. "And you told me that life isn't fair." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Chloe, wait. Please." My mother sobbed, reaching out for me. I opened the door, letting the noise of the country club flood back into the room. I didn't look back. "Happy anniversary," I threw over my shoulder. "Don't spend it all in one place." I didn't stay for dinner. I walked past Savannah mid-interrogation of Bradley about my net worth, handed over my ticket, and left. When the Aventador's engine roared to life, it felt like a door slamming shut on everything I used to be. I drove out of Oakbridge Country Club and never looked back. I didn't need to. In circles built on image, collapse travels faster than truth. Over the next year, the Hastings family unraveled. Chase fell first. He had spent years pretending to be a serial entrepreneur, funded quietly by my father's shrinking credit. 2 weeks after the party, his Jeep was repossessed outside a downtown bar. Without money, his lifestyle dissolved. The friends vanished. The image cracked. He ended up working retail, answering to someone younger, wearing a name tag instead of designer labels. Savannah's fall was slower and far more complete. Her marriage to Bradley had always been strategic, but once he realized the family's wealth was an illusion, his interest vanished. 4 months later, he filed for divorce. The prenup she never bothered to read left her with almost nothing. No skills, no leverage, just a thin alimony check and a downgraded life. She moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. At one point, she tried to reach me through my assistant, suggesting a sister's lunch. The message never reached me. Then came my parents. My father lost his position quietly, escorted out with a fraction of what he once commanded. Without income, the debt he'd hidden collapsed in on itself. Within months, the bank took everything: the house, the possessions, the illusion. They left Oakbridge in silence, trading prestige for survival in a neighborhood they once mocked. I didn't celebrate any of it. Real closure isn't revenge. It's distance. And by the time they hit bottom, I was already far enough away that none of it could reach me anymore. I took the money from the sale of OmniRoute and launched a venture capital firm dedicated entirely to funding female founders from underprivileged backgrounds. I bought a sprawling mid-century modern home in the hills, surrounded by massive glass windows and old-growth trees. I filled it with art I loved, rescued 2 oversized, aggressively affectionate dogs, and surrounded myself with a chosen family of brilliant, loyal, and authentic friends. Occasionally, I'll take the Aventador out for a late-night drive. When I hit the open highway and let the engine open up, the roar of the V12s drowns out any lingering ghosts of my past. I am no longer the invisible girl, the placeholder, the oops baby. I am the architect of my own empire, built on a foundation of sheer resilience and powered by the absolute certainty that the best revenge is simply a life exceptionally well lived. And that's how I turned a lifetime of being ignored into the ultimate revenge. Karma didn't just knock on their door, it drove a Lamborghini right over their egos. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family to build your own empire? Tell me in the comments. If you loved this sweet serving of justice, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more insane real-life drama.